What is it like to be part of a leadership development class based on the book of Nehemiah? That is exactly the question we're going to be asking today. And I'm really excited because before the Nehemiah Way was a YouTube channel, before it was a book, before it was a podcast, it was really an experiment, a workshop in the church, Brandywine Grace Church in Pennsylvania. And today I'm really excited to have one of the participants in that first workshop series, Matt Davis.
Right. So all these skills that I develop in leadership and leading people in my day job, I actually don't utilize at church. And it really opened my eyes to like, wow, he's using his business mindset for advancing the kingdom. And it was just something I hadn't seen before in the Bible as I read through it.
Matt, thanks so much for being here. I'm really looking forward to sharing your story.
Hey, John, thanks for inviting me. And it was so exciting to be a part of the first ever Nehemiah Way course. And it's great to be here to be able to talk about it. And it's awesome to see how much is growing as well since that first course. So real excited to get into it with you, man.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, a lot of times when people read the book, one of the comments I get when someone's read it is they'll say, wow, this is really interesting. Because at first I was like, maybe this is like a commentary on Nehemiah, or maybe it's a how-to guide on mobilizing volunteers. And then they're pleasantly just surprised to see it has that biblical commentary, but it's also very like practical. And the workshop series that we did at Brandywine Grace was really where it all began. And that's something that seems to stand out is it's almost like right in the book, chapter by chapter, it's taking us through each week of this workshop series. And I think it's going to be really cool just to hear from your perspective, like what that was like experiencing that. But before we jump into that, Matt, why don't you tell us just a little bit about your background and your testimony?
Yeah, so I have been going to church and following Jesus since I can ever remember. But I went to a church when I was in middle school that actually the head pastor of BGC was my youth pastor. So that's how I got connected with my current church, and many of the people at my church is through him being my youth pastor at a different church. My wife and I met when we were both in middle school and we're married very young. So Kenny, who's our pastor, actually married us, which is pretty cool. And so to have somebody like that I know that I've been able to see follow Jesus and live his life throughout, when he left to start Brandywine Grace Church, it was really an obvious move for us as a family that we wanted to be a part of it. So I think we've been at Brandywine Grace Church for, it has been 13, 14 years at this point as a family. That's the only church really my kids have ever known. And it's just a great place to be, a great community, great home. And I think most importantly, it's led by people that I really admire and see following Jesus, which to me is the most important part, is the leadership of the church. So it's been great to be there. And it's crazy being around so many people that have known me for over 30 years, so they can remember when I was a teenager and did stupid things, and now they know me as an adult where I still do stupid things, but it's different. So it is really people that have known me for a very long time, which is, I think, makes a real community.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Well, and I think what's interesting with that, you've been part of Brandywine Grace from around the time it was a church plant, right? And then through some of those. Yeah, so you probably remember those days when, the three pastors were more or less doing all the work and everyone was, pitching in here and there, but, it was, just kind of in that church plant mode. What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, the church literally started at a middle school that turned into a high school, and then we met out of a movie theater for a little while, which I actually really liked the movie theater experience, but it's very hard to do childcare in a movie theater when you are literally like in the pit of the movie theater. You're letting a whole bunch of toddlers run around, which was our experience. But when you have to have something like setting up and tearing down church every day, there were a lot of people that were willing to jump in from like mobilizing the church in the morning and literally getting it set up, because you knew if you didn't do that, you weren't going to have church that day. So I know there were a lot of people that put time, effort, sweat into it, which made it work and got us to the point where we are today, where we have our own building and we have a lot more people at the church. So there's a lot more work to do. But what I found is, especially early on, like a lot of the strategy was consolidated among the three pastors that we had. Right. So it was like the three pastors were the ones like running the church and making the decisions. And there were a lot of people that could be mobilized to do certain tasks. But it definitely felt like there was that separation of the three pastors that were doing all of the care, all of the leadership, all of the strategy, and then they kind of had hands on Sunday morning and Sunday during the day. And that's all that was really visible to me at the time, which I'm sure is a tremendous amount of pressure and responsibility on those three people to actually make that happen. That just had to be really, really difficult for them during that time, but also very grateful for their leadership as they led us through it and really got us to the point where we are today, which is just such a thriving and great church.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's interesting. I was interviewing a pastor recently, and he pointed out as being a pastor of a very small church in his case for a period of time, talked about there's only so many people that you can kind of point at a problem. It's
Yeah.
like from a volunteer perspective, there's so many hours that each person has and so much capacity. And so often we think of it in the church, we think about financial resource,
Yeah.
but the people resource. And, if you have just a few people that are kind of directing all the shots, you have, 50, 100, 150 people that are, going to them and saying, okay, what do I do next? And what do I do next? And, and then that, creates a lot of that overhead. Particularly for a church plant, because it's all just getting started and everyone's figuring out how it's all going to work. And that setup and teardown can really can weigh, it consumes a lot of that time for sure.
Yeah, and I think in the past I've also kind of experienced that. Like I feel like I've never been really as a part of like that inside core group of the church, and I find that there's like the three, there's a small group of pastors, and then a lot of times there's like their go-to circle of people that they'll point towards. And I think what you just said about like there's only so many people you can point at it. Usually, even if there are 150 people in the church, there's only like 3 or 4 people that actually get appointed to solve a problem. And the rest of them are just viewed as hands and people that, might get called on every once in a while. But then I find it's like, you have the small group of leaders, and then you have the small group of point people that'll run real key strategic initiatives. And those are the ones that get burnt out really fast. They're the ones that have full-time jobs, they have kids they're taking care of. They're now putting in 30 hours a week at church when they were only doing 2 beforehand, and then they kind of get run into the ground and get burnt out and actually stop serving. So it is interesting to see that even when we do call it other people, it tends to be that same group as opposed to really mobilizing the entire church.
Yeah. And that was really a lot of, I think, the motivation behind the workshop series when it first came about. And I remember the pastors approaching me about it and saying, we want to mobilize a lot more people. We want to develop more leaders. We want to activate more leaders and so forth. And so that was a lot of the motivation behind, let's start to do leadership development and see what that looks like.
Yeah.
So why don't you talk about like, how did you end up being part of this workshop series? And then what was that experience like when you first got started?
So when John, you pitched it, you gave a good pitch at church in the morning to get me in the door. So that was a good start. I think you called me and texted me a couple times. So that entrepreneurship piece really came through strong, which was good. But
pestering works, right?
Yeah, exactly. But for me, I've spent a lot of time on my career and growing in my career. I work in the pharmaceutical industry. I run a couple of larger organizations, so I'm responsible for a little over 200 people at the moment right now. And I've always felt like I spend most of my time at work, and then I've got my time at family, and then I almost leave that all behind when it comes to church. Right. So all these skills that I develop in leadership and leading people in my day job, I actually don't utilize at church. And at church, it's more like, hey, can I sign up for this thing, or where can I serve and do my hands part? But the actual like strategy and leadership and all these skills that I develop and use every day during the week, I kind of left those at the door when it came to church. And I think that's what the Nehemiah Way was really exciting for me. Is it was like, hey, how can we utilize this business mindset in your business strategy and business gifting in the church setting? And I was like, dang, like I've never heard anybody be able to talk about that and recommend that I even use that part of my brain that I use all the other time. So I'd love to be involved and get into it, and was really excited to be a part of a course that I felt like unlocked some of my ability to be able to use that gifting in the church setting.
Yeah. I love that. Well, and that's what, really one of the reasons why I like the Nehemiah story so much. In all of scripture, so much of scripture, you're talking about you're seeing God placing someone into a kind of a position of power and authority, and an overseer, and then the things that they did from that position, where Nehemiah was just kind of that everyday person. In fact, I think a lot of you look at the kind of life Nehemiah had in the Persian government, or in the palace and in the court, and the kind of skills that he had professionally were very similar to those that you would see in someone who is a corporate leader, director, a VP, an executive, and that kind of thing. And then you see him really faithfully stepping out and offering those back to God. It's like he was given those talents, those abilities, those experiences, those skills through the path and the journey that God had taken him on in his life, but then also was activated to then apply those skills. And it just seems like there's a very close correlation there to what you're saying.
I think so too, and I remember, I don't remember if it was the first week or the second week, but you talked through how Nehemiah had to pitch his boss, essentially, to say like, all right, I want to go do this project. And you really highlighted like all of the politicking that needed to happen to make that happen, which really resonated me, because I'm like, I've had to make those pitches and I've had to get that alignment and agreement, and even like, what's the expected return on investment, and what's the amount of time that you're going to be invested in this project, and what's it going to sacrifice to your boss. And I couldn't believe it. Like, I just started, like, I wasn't an EMI guy. I don't know that I've actually even read the book before we did this, even though I've been following Jesus since I was 4. Like, I can't guarantee that I've actually read every word of Nehemiah until this course. But then when you just said, like, look, he actually used his business skills and his politicking skills to be able to move forward the kingdom of God, I was like, wow, I would have never expected that would actually work and be an important skill set to have. And it really opened my eyes to like, wow, he's using his business mindset for advancing the kingdom. And it was just something I hadn't seen before in the Bible as I read through it.
Yeah. I mean, so many things, like you say, as I like to call it, Nehemiah's pitch deck,
Yeah,
going
right?
through, and of course, everything, going to God in prayer, from, minute one all the way, every time something happened, it was like Nehemiah prayed, then he acted. And then, that prayer, and then that planning and that preparation and engagement, building stakeholdership. You saw it happen. It clearly happened within the court in that part of it, but also really clearly happened when he arrived in Jerusalem. And, a lot of people had no idea who he was or why he was there. He didn't even tell anybody what he was really doing right at first, but clearly he had a very strong way of being able to connect with people and get people aligned on a common vision, and then just from an organizational perspective, just very detailed in terms of the way he kept records and the way he made sure that he was accounting for the things that were needed well ahead of time, and just so many of the things that I think a lot of us take for granted when we work in a corporate or commercial setting.
Yeah, and I think that part about having to walk in and get people aligned and motivated towards the same goal. I mean, he had to walk in and basically recruit his own team to be able to accomplish this task, right? And so he was able to connect with them on a very personal basis, make them see the value of what they're doing, and then motivate them to be able to do it. And I think one thing I remember you taught us in the course was just about that delegation of authority as well. And when the wall was going up, obviously you're talking about a large wall that gets built around the city. You literally can't be at all the different places because it's just geographically too far spread out. And so needing to put other leaders in charge of certain parts of that project, he had to identify who was the talent, who was the leadership, like give them the authority, set the expectations. Like, again, all these things that I use in the corporate world, and you could see it here play out as the only way to get this massive project done.
Yeah, I love that. So talk a little bit about what it was like, showing up the first week. Like, what was it like every week, and how did you kind of experience the workshop series as you were going through this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the one thing I was wondering about as I walked in is who else is going to be there? What's their background going to be like? Like, are they just walking in because it's another Sunday school thing that you get to do, or will you really have the same motivation as I walked in with? And it was a mix of people. There were some people that had very significant business and corporate backgrounds and have held large leadership positions at other companies. And there were some people that walked in kind of like, off the street that didn't have that experience and wanted to just know how to be able to use their gifting and leadership in the church more. So just getting to know the people in the room, I feel like was a very important part of this, because we did have a project that we had to complete together. And so just so being able to learn who else was in this course and what their gifting was really going to help me set the right expectations. And we had a great group of people, which was a great start. And I really did, like I said, I wasn't a real big Nehemiah guy. I didn't really know where this course was going to go. I didn't know what we were going to learn. And as I mentioned before, when we started talking about some of the business elements of politicking and getting alignment and like working with your boss to be able to get a project moving forward, I realized, oh wow, this is really using our business skill set to be able to move the kingdom of God forward. And so it took me a week or two to be able to get into the right mindset. And then I think from there, continuing to learn through some of the leadership lessons that Nehemiah demonstrated throughout the rest of the book, and at the same time working on our capstone project together as a group, which was awesome because we got a chance in this project to be able to actually use our gifting and what we're learning in the course for a real church problem that we wanted to solve. And so being able to do that and not just talk about it was really beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so many things to unpack there. It was really interesting. You know, it's like you invite a lot of people for something like that, but you don't know who's actually gonna
Yeah.
land and all those kinds of things. And it was such an interesting, because we had about a dozen or more people, and we had a few people that were, you know, kind of in terms of just experience and leadership and business and career, and, you know, that were more, you know, kind of senior to you and I. And you know, there were several others in our age range, but we also had some that were entrepreneurs. We had some that had just been faithful volunteers in the church. We had you know, one person in particular was like in his, you know, early 20s. Someone who's, I've never been in a formal leadership role, but
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, God's called me to lead different things. It was involved in campus ministry and some things like that. And, you know, was just really eager to see what the Bible had to say about leadership development. So such a you know, really a wide range of experiences of everyone coming into the group.
It was. And I think what was great about the class is, you know, for all those people and all the different ranges of experiences, there was something in it for everyone. Like for someone like me, I was excited to be able to see how I could apply my gifting to the church. I think for others, they got to learn about leadership holistically, right? You got to learn like what is a mark of a good leader, and what does good leadership look like, and what does the Bible have to say about good leadership in general, which is a lesson not only to be applied to the church, but also back to the business setting as they grow their career or whatever they choose to do in their lives. And so I thought that even though we all came from different backgrounds, there was something special in it for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Well, you mentioned the project. So, yeah, I guess, as you say, you know, not too many times you go into a Sunday school class, so to speak, and get work assigned, right? So talk a little bit about that. What was that experience like?
Well, I think it was cool because we actually, I think, you know, we had a project that was kind of outlined for us to start, which was, at the time, our church was struggling with connection. So we were a church that was growing, and we had a lot of people that were involved, but we're having people leave the church, and specifically the feedback that we were getting was, I just don't feel connected to people. You know, people were showing up on Sunday mornings, and then they were leaving on Sunday mornings, and for some people, that was all of the engagement they had with the church community. And so our task at the Capstone Project was, how can we focus on improving our connection as a church? And so I think even had to start from the Capstone Project, if I remember, just debating what would be some of the more impactful ways that we could actually impact connection. And so how could we improve that? And what were some of the things that we wanted to tackle as a group to be able to improve that with the church? So it was great to have a real, actual strategic church problem to solve that wasn't just, you know, something small. It was like, this is a nebulous part of the church. We don't know exactly how to do this, and so why don't you put some single-minded people together to go figure it out?
Yeah. Yeah. And it was, what was really interesting about it, initially, it was really presented almost as much a problem statement as a project.
Yeah.
And then it was fun to see the group wrestle with, like you said, like coming up with ideas, that ideation process of what are, you know, what is, even how big is this problem? How do we define the problem? And what are some specific things we could do to address it? You know, even some moments where, you know, it's like, I think, you know, especially with, it was, I think, a 6 or 8 week time period. there was a point where everyone was going to have to pitch, and it was compressed with the timing. And I remember it got a little tense at times. I was like, I don't know if we're going to make it. And, and so you felt like you could see there was a real investment in the problem as it went on.
Oh yeah, I know. I remember during this, like I had some work things come up where I had to travel over the weekend. I was missing a Sunday and I had assignments, and I was like, guys, I'm so sorry I can't be there. Like, how can I like interact with you guys? How can I work offline? Like it got a little tense. I liked it, but yeah, you really felt like, man, this is a deliverable that I have to achieve in order to make this difference, which excited me, to be honest with you. I thought that was great.
Yeah. Well, I think it really did feel like that in particular made it not feel like, I mean, from my perspective, it didn't feel like I was teaching a class. I'm an educator, and have that background, and that can feel very kind of unidirectional. And it didn't feel that way at all. It really felt like we were in it together with our sleeves rolled up, and how do we define this problem? How do we approach it? How do we use the gifts and talents that are all here in the room? Are there others we need to pull into this? And I think there were some others that, kind of got brought into the periphery of it as well.
Yeah.
And so how did you see it play out? Like what were some of the things that maybe just memorable moments or kind of takeaways as you kind of progressed through that?
Well, I think what was cool is we ended up taking that question of connection, and we after some discussion and debate, we boiled it down to 3 parts. We talked about at a church, I think at the time our church was 300 to 400 people. So we talked about just awareness of needs and awareness of opportunities. So, I think even in a church of that size, which to some feels big and to some feels small and some feels just right, we didn't know when there were opportunities that people needed something. It just wasn't, we didn't have a good mechanism to say somebody was in help, or somebody needed help, or somebody needed to be able to jump in and do small ways of serving. And in the other ways, people didn't know the opportunities that we actually had to connect to the church. They didn't know the ministry opportunities. They didn't know the connection opportunities. So that was the first, is just general awareness. The second we talked about was spiritual gifting, and how spiritual gifting can actually help into what we're supposed to do with the church. I've heard people talk about how sometimes you just have to jump in to church regardless of what your gift is. And like, I do think there's absolutely a time for that. Like, hey, we need 10 children's ministry volunteers. Like, it doesn't matter what your gifting is. Like, just sign up and just show up, and then it'll kind of work out. But I do think that it's better when your serving opportunity lines up with what your gifting is. And so I think what we realized is because we didn't have the full list of serving opportunities, we also didn't know what gifts would then line up with those serving opportunities. So if somebody said, hey, I'm really good at administration, like this is my gift, which we do find is a spiritual gift in the Bible, like how would they apply an administrative spiritual gift to the church? And I don't think many people can answer that. So that was the second pillar we focused on. And then the third pillar was specifically focused on relational connections. So people felt disconnected from each other from a relationship perspective. So what can we do about that to actually meaningfully connect the human beings at our church? Not only in small ways of, discipleship groups, and we call them fight clubs, but it's, small group, like accountability groups, all the way to things like men's and women's ministries, and ministries for people at different ages of their lives and different seasons of their lives, whether single or married, all the way up to just, do we have church picnics? Do we have church dinners? What do we do about holidays? And so those were the 3 pillars that we focused on, which did take us a while to get there. And then we distributed those pillars to actually come up with action plans against each of those. So we got a chance to put together, how do we think we're going to solve these? What are the accountabilities needed? What input do we need from the pastors, and what from the pastors do we need them to delegate to other people? So essentially, we don't have to go through bureaucracy, which is something we deal with in the corporate world. I think it's something we deal with in the church world as well, is that if you have to send every idea up through governance committees at your church, you're going to stifle innovation, same way you do in a corporate culture. So how do we get the autonomy set out in the church and have the right decision makers in place that we could really action some of these things? And so we did put a capstone plan together for those, and we got a chance to pitch it to the pastors, and it was very well received. And so it was great to have to come up with the problems, come up with some plans on how to solve the problems, and have the autonomy to be able to recommend not only an action plan, but also larger, like, what do we actually need from a decision-making autonomy perspective to make this happen?
Yeah. Well, and what was that like, kind of pitching the idea? Because a couple of the pastors, a couple of the elders came out, one of the deacons to kind of hear the pitch. That was kind
Yeah.
of the last day of the workshop. Was that describe that? What was that like?
So for me personally, I like doing those types of things. So I like doing that at work. I like doing it in church. And I like it when you have the freedom and the space to be able to say, like, all right, here's what I think we should do. And here's what I think needs to change. And especially if it's bigger changes, like I get excited about that. I can imagine for some, it might have been more daunting to be like, wait a minute, I'm going to tell the pastors that we should do this project. And I don't want them involved. Like that was part of some of our pitches, is that we actually recommend you don't get involved with this and you have somebody else in place that can do that. I really, to be honest with you, I really enjoyed that part of it, because again, I feel like that's part of the skill set that I have in the corporate world and have to do on a regular basis. And it was really exciting to have that here. But what was great about the course and it being a part of the project of the course, it's exactly what we were asked to do. So I feel like outside of the structure of the course, it would be actually very nerve-wracking, and even for me to go just pitch that out of the blue. Like, hey, here's what I think we need to do out of the blue, and here's what I think needs to change. Versus in the course setting, you asked us, like, hey, this is what I want you to do. I want you to come up with a game plan, and I want you to tell them what you need. And it's like, okay, I can do that. And so I almost feel like we had the freedom to be able to give our real ideas in a way that we don't always have in the church setting.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was really, really showed. I would be interested to know if you remember. And it's funny, I was just thinking, it's been several years now
Yeah.
since this first one went through, and it's just interesting reflecting back now on some of the things that we were talking about as gaps, which I would say now for the church are strengths.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of just that, awareness. First of all, I'd say there's more community connection opportunities in a big way, and thinking about even people who are in that room, the roles that each of them now play. In fact, I think most of them are now in some form of deacon role, or very a strong like leadership supporting role like that. That was just something that seemed to naturally flow from that. But thinking about the strength of the men's ministry, which barely existed at that time,
Right.
which now it's more than 100 strong every time they get together. The women's ministry was already active, but it's even really exploded. Just thinking about big projects to renovate the building, community engagement projects of different kinds, just a lot of the more formal roles that were kind of just informally things being done by volunteers that were well intentioned, but now director roles or volunteer leadership roles that are in place for those. What are some things that, when you think about what's happened since, what are some of the things that seem to have naturally stemmed from those early conversations?
Well, I think we got a chance to break this problem down into more manageable steps. So I feel like from the church, in the church setting, like people feel disconnected. Like, okay, that's a big topic that could mean a lot of different things, versus awareness of needs, spiritual gifts, and relational connection. And so it's like, okay, cool, we can work on those three things independently, and that's even a nice next step. So it was really clear that we had some key points coming out of that we were able to So I worked with some of the pastors to put together just like ministry fairs. That was just like, hey, just so you guys know, here's everything that's available to us in the church. And we had a couple of those throughout the summer that followed from this, so people knew where to get connected and where to plug in. I think we had a community fair where we talked about all the different community opportunities, both from small groups and, like you mentioned, men's ministries and women's ministries. We put us together a spiritual gift survey, so people could go in and see what their spiritual gifts were like and make that happen. And then the relational connection piece. We had a piece of technology that we were starting to use, but not everybody was using it. And some groups were using it, and some groups were using the old technology, and some groups were just using text messages. And we had a real group effort in the church to be able to consolidate onto this one platform. And once we consolidate everything onto one platform, it became then the life hub of the connection of the church. So everybody knew how to contact each other. They knew where to go. And it was just a pretty simple case of just getting everybody on the same page. I will tell you that our plan that we had come up with from the course is not how all of that happened. I think the plan probably got us 75% of the way there. And then some things got done in ways that we didn't expect or didn't think were going to happen. But I can say with confidence that all of the things we set out in this capstone did end up happening in the church, just not all the ways that we anticipated they were going to happen.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting. Yeah, as you say, I mean, so many of the things did happen, at least on the surface would appear very independent from the work this group was doing. But I do have to wonder, the fact that the questions were being asked, that there was thought being given to the idea. Because I think about, like you said, like the kind of introduction of that platform that kind of just brought everybody together, that wasn't really connected to this work, but it was something that followed that really started to connect some of the connect people and address some of the gaps that existed. I think about Amy, who co-authored the book The Nehemiah Way and was kind of documenting this whole thing, actually spearheaded the effort to build like a weekly newsletter that just kind of kept everybody informed, and doing it in a way that was like, engaging. The title made you want to open it to see what was going on, and it had those visual effects, and it was more than just an email with like some bullet points. It started to be that intentionality. So it's even some of those things that were removed, it did seem like there were almost like the fact that it was getting some attention kind of got the wheels in motion in some one way or another.
Yeah, I like to think that we did a little bit of inception, that we were like, hey, here's the ways that it could be solved and here's how we could do it. And then someone in the church was like, hey, maybe we can solve this way. And they used a different way to do it. And maybe we were the ones that helped drive some of the thought partnership behind that. So
yeah,
we'll go with that. But yeah, it did feel a little independent with some of these things. I mean, some were a direct outcome of our course, which is we had the game plan, we executed the game plan, it got better. But some of these things were ideas and plans that we had put in place that other people in the church ended up picking up and running with. And I think that's a huge win as well. I think that was great because I think our church is definitely better as a result of the thinking that came out of this capstone project.
Yeah, I love that. So if a pastor's watching this and thinking, or, an elder at a church thinking, maybe it would make sense for us to do a workshop series, kind of like what's described in the Nehemiah Way. As someone who's been through it, maybe just interested in a couple thoughts on why it was valuable to you as a participant in it, and what, you see as the impact to the larger church community for doing this type of a program.
Yeah, I think an encouragement I would give to those folks that maybe comes from some of my personal background is there's probably a lot of people at your church that would love to step up into a leadership role and just don't know how to do it. We just don't know, who do I talk to? Who do I go to? Like, how do I build that relationship with you to be able to make that happen? And in some cases, sometimes it almost feels like you have to, as a church member, like put in a lot of time, like personally with the pastors, and that can be hard because pastors have limited time, versus something like this where you almost have this opportunity to step up into a leadership role on a smaller scale and to be able to diversify that group of people that are in leadership. So I think my pitch to you from this course would be, if you really want to unlock the full power of your church to be able to serve Jesus and make an advance in the kingdom, you want to use the giftings of all the people that you have in your church, and not just a small number of people that are responsible for leading projects and the rest that actually execute them. So see who's interested in something like this, because you might find that you have some really strong leaders in your congregation that don't know how to get plugged in and involved, and you may just unlock their talents, their skill set, their creativity to make a real impact for the church, the community, and the gospel.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. What about just from a personal spiritual development, just kind of walk in faith and just getting into scripture? What were some of the things that you experienced from that perspective through this?
Well, I think from the personal development piece, it was definitely looking for more opportunities to use my whole self, my whole skill set at church. I think that that's something that I hadn't done. I was just like walk in and look for opportunities that there were, rather than try to create opportunities or try to let my passions and skills come into play. And so it really challenged me from a personal development perspective to bring my whole skill set and gifting into church and try to use it. So that was really great. And I think the other thing was trying to help me understand that part of my spiritual growth is actually some of the ways that I'm growing at work. Like when I grow in being able to lead a meeting or lead teams or delegate authority, like all of those are things that can be used for the gospel and for spiritual gifting. And that was an important distinction for me to, or I'd say an important thing for me to learn, is that it's all tied together. They're not separate, and that the gifting that I'm learning from a workplace perspective does apply to the church, and it is an evidence of God's grace that I have that ability to be able to learn that in the workplace and apply it both to work and in other areas like the church and ministry setting.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So, what's next for you? Just in terms of, as you've, this project, you had some involvement.
Yeah.
What are some things that you're doing in the church today, or thinking about doing in the church, just in your journey?
So the honest answer to that is I got a chance to lead through a number of things after for about a year after this setup, and then my work life got a little crazy. So my job tripled in responsibility, and then I got some extra things added on top of it. So I have been back into a little bit more of that serving role of being able to just serve where needs are at the moment. But I do know that when I have more capacity and I'm able to focus more on work, I feel now like I know how to actually step up and lead and how to actually do it. I think before this class, I wouldn't have been thinking about that as a future church project in term. And now when hopefully this project that I'm leading ends in the next couple of months, we'll have a little more capacity and excited to be able to jump back in and new leadership capabilities and opportunities. I don't exactly know what that looks like. There's so many great things happening in our church right now. It's actually interesting to not really know where the needs are at the moment, but I'm excited to be able to dive back in and put my creative energy into the next big project that comes along.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Matt, thanks so much for joining us today and just sharing your story. Just so interesting to kind of hear. We talk a lot about like the book of Nehemiah and the implementing at a kind of high level within a church, ways to mobilize a church full of leaders. But just helpful, I think, to hear like what it's like to just experience that as someone who is kind of stepping up into leadership or being invited into leadership development as you were. So thanks for sharing your story.
Hey, thanks for having me. And thank you for teaching the course. It was a great opportunity. I'm really glad to have done it, and I'm excited for all the different people that this is going to affect moving forward. So thank you, John.
Yeah, awesome. Before we leave, I always like to ask this question, and I know it was especially fun to see you discover the story of Nehemiah throughout this one, but what's your favorite Nehemiah moment?
It was definitely Nehemiah's pitch to the king. Like definitely his pitch to be like, all right, I'm going to strategically plan out how I'm going to convince this guy to let me go build this wall. And like all the forethought and the like knowing the different people and being able to put that into place to make that happen, and realizing like, oh, not only is that necessary, but he was encouraged to do that. That was probably the most eye-opening moment for me in Nehemiah, was even to just get the permission to go. So I think that was my favorite part.
That's awesome. I love that. Well, Matt, thanks again for being here. This was awesome.
My pleasure. Thanks, John.